What invention has peaked, been perfected to the point where it cannot advance any further? Story 1. The mortar and pestle. Literally has not changed since the Neolithic. They're even still usually made of either stone or ceramic, same as they have been for thousands of years. Story 2. The overhand knot. Lots of alternatives have been invented, but nothing has really happened since the day it was invented, with the exception of the left-handed inversion, which was likely invented the day after. Story 3. What product has spent the most time being engineered? The single-use aluminum beverage can. Since their release in 1957, aluminum cans have become the most engineered products in the world. The shape of the can allows the can be as light as possible and still be stacked and shipped. Securing the pull tab to the can was another engineering marvel, where the failure point near the tab when you pull it allows the pressure inside the can to aid opening. Plus, since the pull tab is attached, the entire product could be recycled with no waste. The whole has been designed for maximum pourability. The shape of the can is the most efficient, so when being shipped, the can takes up as little room as possible and still maintain its role in carrying liquid. The concave shape at the bottom of the can allows for less aluminum than would be needed with a flat bottom. The sidewall of a can is 75 microns. Once filled and sealed, the can can hold up to 80 psi in pressure before the bottom starts to push out. More time has been spent engineering a can than any project you can name. The Space Shuttle, jumbo jets, the Manhattan Project, all have less engineering time than the ongoing development of the aluminum can. Story 4. The paperclip, I guess. It hasn't changed much since they came up with it. It just holds papers together and that's pretty much it. Story 5. String musical instruments. Hundreds of cultures around the world, and most of them came up with this guitar sort of shape and size using strings to make sound. Any sort of attempt to improve on it will mostly be diminishing returns. Story 6. Razors, at least the stick kind. Adding 12 more rows of blades, ==, better shave at this point. Story 7. The safety bicycle. It replaced the penny farthing bicycle in the 1880s, and it's still the most common design. You can slap an electricow engine on it, you can adjust the number of gears, the size of the wheels, etc., but the diamond frame with pedal-driven chain drive is just a winner. Story 8. I was just thinking about this. Speakers are kind of goated. 2 magnets just floating around, and if you pass the right electricity through it, it can make any sound. That's kind of wild. Like a speaker from the 80s can make all the sounds in music today, even when the engineers didn't know that sound existed. Not software or driver updates needed. They just work. Story 9. The aluminum can is surprisingly complex from an engineering perspective. Honestly, there's many things that are peaked. Even cardboard boxes can't be improved on at this point. Story 10. The humble transistor. Powers every computer, and we have hit the physical limit of small wires, and any smaller and you get into wobbly quantum weirdness, or electrons jumping. Story 11. Most of the stuff people mention can still be theoretically improved regarding resource efficiency. Once you develop new materials, the product could become lighter, thinner, or use less material overall. It could consume less energy in production, or when in use. It could become easier to recycle, or simply prettier to look at. One might argue that the question is not about materials, but about the product from a functional perspective. However, the choice of material can heavily impact the way a product is used. Generally speaking, saying something will never be improved is a very hot take. Many of the inventions we use today would have been considered absurd concepts not so long ago. Story 12. With its simplicity and functional elegance, the fork has reached design perfection for spearing and lifting food. Attempts to innovate often complicate without enhancing its primary purpose, making the traditional 4-tined fork a pinnacle of utilitarian design. Story 13. With its replaceable lead and efficient design, the mechanical pencil stands as a pinnacle of writing tools, balancing disposability and permanence. Its core utility and design, perfected over time, leave little room for fundamental advancements beyond materials or additional features. Story 14. The paperclip. Its design is a marvel of simplicity and efficiency, holding sheets of paper together without damaging them. Any modifications would likely complicate its use or stray from its original purpose, making the classic paperclip design as close to perfect as an invention can get. Story 15. I'd say current screens, monitors are approximately at that point. Most of the things you can change or improve just won't matter in the bulk of use cases. There's an argument that going from 4K to 8K can have meaning, but regardless, there'd be zero utility, excepting VR applications, where going from 8K to 16K would provide anything to the consumer. We've already got approximately 7 million colors with just 256 bits of precision. Jumping up to approximately 134 million colors isn't likely to result in a viewing difference. 120 Hz refresh rate is useful over 60 Hz, but 240 Hz is likely not useful for watching a movie, and 480 Hz would definitely not be useful. There's some potential room for lighting changes, but they will be marginal, and your average person likely won't notice much of a difference. To be clear, there's niches for all of these advancements, so they'll be made, but the tech available to your average consumer for screens is pretty much peaked. Story 16. Music production. Not my opinion, but told to me by a fairly successful music producer. He said it peaked in the 70s and hasn't really improved because it can't. We were already very good at it 40 or 50 years ago. He was talking about the actual sound quality, not new artists or technology. Unless you improve human hearing, you are getting the best quality sound possible. So enjoy. Story 17. I really do feel like you cannot really improve the Ziploc bags further. This includes vacuum variations. They got all the variations that suit your needs. Commercial, industrial, space to consumer grade. Story 18. Chopsticks. Any attempt to redesign the chopsticks will probably change its function. There are still different types of chopsticks out there, differing in material, length, diameter. But at its most basic form, the chopsticks cannot be improved in any major way. Story 19. Flip-flops. Simplest concept that doesn't need non-improvement. It's perfect. It's been perfect for millennia. It is a rare, straight upgrade to walking around barefoot. Anything else, there's a downside. Flip-flops are a straight upgrade. Footwear, cockroach-killing weapon. Also to beat your kids, it does it all, folks. Story 20. Similarly, the zipper is another invention that has undergone refinement over the years, but has not seen revolutionary advancements in recent times. The basic mechanism of interlocking teeth remains largely unchanged, though improvements have been made in terms of durability, ease of use, and materials. Story 21. IRC. I recall from calculus class in HS learning about how the specific dimensions of the 12 ounces can, in terms of the ratio between height and diameter, is generally such that it maximizes volume while minimizing the surface area, material required of the can. A taller, skinnier can or a shorter, wider can requires more aluminum per ounce of product. Story 22. I've got two for you, the air gap in plumbing and steam turbines for power generation. So it turns out that if you connect your wastewater in a continuous chain to your potable water, various conditions will occur and you'll contaminate your water supply with the backflow, even though it's under pressure going one way. So some plumber cut a chunk out of the line, put a funnel on the bottom and went, they'll figure out a better system eventually. We did not. Steam turbines piss me off. As an engineering-inclined person, we take the power of atomic weapons and tame it to our use, creating stronger and more efficient nuclear engines, and are even working to make artificial star fusion, to boil water, which turns a turbine, which generates electricity. I halfway feel like people just gave up and haven't had a creative idea for energy capture since the turbine is good enough, but it's entirely possible that it's the best we'll get at scale. The fusion startup Helion has some controversy about whether they're grifting venture capitalists, but I absolutely love them for finally doing something other than a turbine. They use magnets to condense the plasma, then use the same magnets to suck the energy back out. Story 23. Surprisingly, microwaves and dishwashers haven't actually changed that much since they first showed up on the market. Sure, we've added timers and smart features to them, but their core mechanics have basically remained unchanged since their invention. Story 24. Whatever it is, an old one and a new one would be indistinguishable. If it has changed in the last 10 years, it is probably still improving. What is something where you cannot tell the difference between a 100-year-old one and a new one, except for the wear? Knives, shoes, dishes, jewelry, toothpick. I saw a more than 2,000-year-old folding cot in a museum in Egypt that looked identical to one I've seen in a modern sporting goods store. It had metal hinges and folded in half, with the legs folding. Looked modern, but short. Story 25. Mechanical wristwatches. The Swiss lever escapement hasn't changed for about 200 years. At the heart of your fancy watch is still a mainspring, 4 wheels, and an escapement. And a high-beat watch will tick 10 times a second for 40-ish hours on one wind. That's almost 1.5 million times. Story 26. The bicycle. Sure, You can make it lighter, less rolling resistance, fancier transmissions, better suspension, maybe slap on an electric motor too. But at its core, the design hasn't changed, and everything is a minor improvement at this point. Story 27. Disc Golf. I feel like anything added at this point would be subtractive. Also, the disc types and varieties are so vast that there really isn't a need to continue the innovation unless you're looking for an incredibly specific variant. Story 28. I think we're pretty damn close to the apex of small arms. There hasn't been a great leap in gun tech in more than 100 years. Something might get slightly lighter, more durable, or what have you, but nothing like the jump from black powder to smokeless brass cartridges. Aside from caseless ammo, which is kind of a dead end at the moment, there isn't a whole lot of improvements left to be made. Story 29. I think I've read that the gasoline internal combustion engine is pretty much as good as it's going to get, which makes sense after like a century of people improving it. Further improvements will likely cost a lot but give little gain. Story 30. There are 6 classical machines known since antiquity that have been used for thousands of years as the basis of almost every physical machine ever invented. These are the lever, wheel, pulley, inclined plane, wedge, and screw. The screw was the last of these invented sometime around 700 BCE, and it was mostly used for moving things like water by rotating the screw within a casing which pushes the material upwards against gravity. It's a very efficient way of turning rotational motion into vertical motion and has been used that way for over 2.5 millennia. You would think there would be no way to improve upon such fundamental and well-tested designs. And yet, in 2003, an Australian inventor patented a novel way of using the screw. Rather than rotate the screw, you rotate the casing around it to move material. The Olds elevator is a much better design because it applies less force to the material and avoids air being pulled in. Extremely useful for things like explosives or where precision is needed. Given the existence of the Olds elevator, I really don't think we can ever assume that any invention cannot be improved upon. Story 31. Relatively to its complexity and considering its end of life, car combustion engine. There is no single invention in this class of complexity in which so much effort and resources were invested to make it more reliable and efficient. Farewell, your time has come. Story 32. Optics in binoculars or telescopes for terrestrial viewing. I'm not sure if I'm right about this, but the optics have been so perfected that the only limiting factor when viewing long distances is atmospheric turbulence, which is impossible to circumvent. And I'm just talking the optics themselves, HUD, electronic stabilization and stuff like that. It's just another topic. Story 33. Phone. Call it smartphone or whatever, still only does calls and is inconvenient to type on compared to any keyboard. Camera, alarm, and GPS are good, but all other features are just 1984 lifetime eating products that latch onto your soul. No added value even if the screen is 0.5 inches wider in the new version, or foldable, or crumble-able like a sheet of paper. Story 34. At least in one sense, phone screen resolutions. Ever since we hit 450, 500 dpi on the screens in phones, there's no point to higher density. You literally can't perceive it. Even if you look super close with the naked eye at a modern phone screen, there's no individual pixels you can notice. They're too small. It's why phone display tech has been advancing on colors, refresh rates, and other traits, because the display resolution has been tapped out. Now, if phones suddenly get way bigger than they are now for some reason. Story 35. Video games, with the emphasis on games, because I'm not sure I want to categorize the immersive virtual world experiences with some gaming aspects the same as Tetris/Doom/Civilization anymore. Sure, it's all a sliding scale, but whatever games are adding to their next-gen releases nowadays very rarely contributes to making it a better game. Prettier, bigger, more realistic, but not a better game. Kind of like how diamond robots that actually fight on the board don't make a game of chess itself more interesting. Story 36. An example is electricity itself. While we have made great strides in the use and distribution of electricity, more efficient and cleaner sources of energy, such as solar and wind installations, have emerged. Thus, even the most advanced technologies can be subject to improvements and innovation. Story 37. From what I understand, at least to a degree, the rifle. The fine mechanics of contemporary assault rifles are so refined that there's really not too much more to do unless we create some new super material. That's why when the US Army held trials to find a new rifle back in the 80s, 90s, They spent $300 million only to conclude that they didn't need to put a new rifle in their soldiers' hands as much as they needed to put scopes on what they already had. Story 38. It's looking like this is the case for firearms. The two most effective and ubiquitous weapons are still variations of the AK and the AR, which go back to 1947 and 1956, respectively. A Colt 1911 is to the day a very popular choice, as well as is a Remington 870, 1950. Story 39. Nails. Sure, you can change the material they're made of and the shape for different situations, but jamming a chunk of metal into two pieces of wood to fix them together has been a thing that hasn't really changed for centuries. Story 4019. 11 Machine pistol. Parts of the pistol can be swapped out for different parts, essentially the same pistol design for over 100 years. Parts that can be swapped are sights and barrel, for example. Story 41. Software engineer here, so I'll give two tech ones. Git. For the uninitiated, it is a version control system, basically a system to replace you having code_v2 final 2.docs. It is really powerful and such a smart invention. A commit is a change or selection of changes. Code projects can have branches, but these are intended to be reconciled back into the main project via a merge. Git tracks your changes, the time and order they were made, and who by so a team of people can comfortably work on the same project without unneeded nasty conflicts. It puts power in the developer's hands to go back and forwards through the history of a project. Regex. Completely arcane and borderline unintelligible but incredible at matching string patterns. Story 42. Gas engines, like the steamers of old, have run their course, and waiting in the wings is something old that can do what they did and done in mass production. So we are going to need all our own resources as well. That is, of course, if we disconnect from everyone else, as our direction must take a different direction than theirs, and they need to go home and take care of their own, and not at the expense of ours.